The gunshot pierced the air like lightning splitting the Arizona sky, sending Hannah Mitchell running toward her father's store instead of away from the danger. It was 1876, and Copper Springs was meant to be a fresh start for the Mitchell family, not a place to bury them. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she lifted her skirts, feet pounding across the dusty main street, paying no mind to the scandalized gasps of ladies ducking into doorways. All she could think about was her father alone in the mercantile with whatever trouble had just erupted. "Pa!" Hannah cried as she burst through the door, the little bell above jingling incongruously cheerful against the tableau of violence before her. Her father lay on the floor, blood seeping through his shirt, while a tall man with a dark hat stood over the would-be robber, gun still smoking in his steady hand. The thief wasn't moving. The stranger turned, and Hannah was struck by eyes as clear and blue as a mountain lake, set in a sun-weathered face that couldn't be more than 30 years old. "Your pa's alive, madam," he said, holstering his weapon with practiced ease, "but he needs a doctor quick." Hannah dropped to her knees beside her father, pressing her hands against the wound. "The nearest doctor's in Silver Creek, 2 days' ride," she whispered, desperation clawing at her throat. "He'll never make it." The stranger knelt beside her, his movements calm and assured. "Preston Payne," he introduced himself, already rolling up his sleeves. "Used to ride with an army medic during the war. I can help, if you'll let me." Hannah looked from her father's ashen face to the steady hands of this cowboy who'd appeared from nowhere. What choice did she have? "Please," was all she could manage. "I need clean water, bandages, whiskey if you've got it," Preston ordered, already assessing the damage. "Bullet went clean through, thank God." For the next hour, Hannah worked alongside Preston as he cleaned and dressed her father's wound, his hands never faltering even as sweat beaded on his brow. When it was done, they moved her father to his small room behind the store and settled him into bed. "He'll live," Preston assured her, washing blood from his hands in a basin. "But he'll need watching. Fever's the real danger now." Hannah sank into a chair, exhaustion and relief warring within her. "I can't thank you enough. Mr. Payne—" "Preston," he corrected, his voice soft in the quiet room. "And there's no need for thanks. Just happened to be in the right place." "What brings you to Copper Springs?" Hannah asked, suddenly curious about this man who'd saved her father's life. Preston's expression shifted slightly, something guarded passing across his features. "Just passing through, heading north to Montana Territory." "Well, I'm grateful you were passing through today," Hannah said, meaning every word. "I'm Hannah Mitchell. That's my father, Edward." Preston nodded, his eyes lingering on her face perhaps a moment longer than was proper. "You're new here. I can tell by the state of your store, not fully stocked yet." Hannah smiled despite everything. "We arrived just 3 weeks ago from Philadelphia. Pa thought the West would offer better opportunities." "It does," Preston confirmed, "along with better dangers." His eyes flicked to Edward's sleeping form. "Someone should stay with him tonight. I'll take first watch if you need rest." "That's very kind, but—" A commotion outside interrupted her response. The door to the mercantile banged open, and several sets of heavy footsteps approached the back room. "Mitchell," a gruff voice called. "Sheriff wants a word about that shooting." Preston tensed beside her, one hand drifting toward his holster. Hannah touched his arm lightly. "It's all right," she assured him. "That's just Mr. Turner, the deputy." When Turner and 2 other men entered the small room, their eyes immediately fixed on Preston with suspicion. "This the fellow who did the shooting?" Turner asked, his hand resting on his own gun. Hannah stood. "This is Mr. Payne. He saved my father's life when a man tried to rob the store. The thief shot Pa first, and Mr. Payne defended him." Turner's eyes narrowed. "That's so?" Because word spreading it was cold blood. Preston stood slowly, hands visible. "Your thief drew first, shot this man, and was turning his gun on me. Self-defense. Plain and simple." "We'll let the sheriff decide that," Turner said. "He'll want to speak with you, both of you." He jerked his head toward the door. "Come along." Hannah glanced worriedly at her father. "I can't leave him alone." Mrs. Parsons can sit with him, one of the men offered. She's waiting outside. Good woman with nursing experience. Hannah hesitated, but knew she had little choice. Within minutes, the older woman had taken her place at Edward's bedside, and Hannah found herself walking alongside Preston toward the sheriff's office, acutely aware of the stares from townsfolk gathering on the boardwalks. "I'm sorry about this," she whispered. Preston's face remained impassive, but his voice was gentle when he replied, "Nothing to be sorry for. Truth's on our side." The sheriff, a barrel-chested man named Holloway with iron-gray hair and a bushy mustache, listened to their accounts with skeptical attention. Hannah noticed how Preston kept his explanations straightforward, omitting any personal details about himself. "The dead man's Billy Rakes," Sheriff Holloway finally said. "Wanted in 3 territories, been causing trouble up and down the line." He eyed Preston. "You've done us a favor, I suppose, though I don't appreciate gunplay in my town." "Wasn't looking for trouble," Preston replied evenly. "Rarely are," Holloway said, not sounding convinced. "You planning to stay in Copper Springs, Payne?" Preston glanced briefly at Hannah before answering. "Just passing through." "Well, you're free to go, but don't leave town just yet. Might have more questions." Outside the sheriff's office, twilight was settling over the town. Hannah hugged her shawl around her shoulders against the cooling desert air. "Thank you again," she said to Preston. "If there's anything I can do to repay your kindness—" "There is one thing," Preston interrupted softly. "Let me help watch over your father tonight. A gunshot wound needs careful tending the first day or two." Hannah studied his face in the fading light. There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read, a weariness perhaps, or something deeper. "Why would you do that for strangers?" she asked. Preston's smile was barely there, just a slight softening around his eyes. "Maybe I've seen enough men die to want to save one when I can." Something in his tone told Hannah not to press further. "All right," she agreed, "but at least let me offer you a meal first." They returned to find Mrs. Parsons had not only watched over Edward, but had prepared a simple stew as well. After ensuring Hannah's father was resting comfortably, the older woman departed with promises to return in the morning with fresh bread. Hannah and Preston ate in companionable silence at the small table in the living quarters behind the store. When they finished, Preston insisted she rest while he took the first watch over her father. "I'll wake you if anything changes," he promised. Exhaustion finally overwhelming her, Hannah retreated to her small room. Despite her intention to merely rest for an hour, she fell into a deep sleep, only waking when pale morning light streamed through her window. Alarmed at having slept the entire night, she rushed to her father's room, only to find Preston still sitting vigilantly beside the bed, looking as though he hadn't moved all night. "You should have woken me," she chided gently. Preston shook his head. "You needed the rest. Your father's doing well. Fever started to rise around midnight, but broke before dawn." Hannah checked her father's forehead, finding it cool and dry. His color was better too, and his breathing steady. "You saved him twice now," she said, turning to Preston with genuine gratitude. "I don't know how—" Her words halted as she truly looked at him in the morning light. Exhaustion lined his face, and beneath his open collar, she caught sight of what appeared to be an old scar trailing down his neck. Preston noticed her gaze and adjusted his bandana. "Army life leaves its marks," he said simply. Before Hannah could respond, a knock at the store's front door drew her attention. "That'll be Mrs. Parsons," she said, smoothing her rumpled dress self-consciously. You should see to your visitor," Preston finished for her. "I'll check your father's bandages once more, then I'll be on my way." Hannah wanted to protest, but couldn't find the right words. This man was a stranger, after all, despite all he'd done for them. She nodded and went to open the store door. It wasn't Mrs. Parsons waiting, but Sheriff Holloway, his expression grim. "Miss Mitchell," he greeted, removing his hat. "Need a word with Payne." Hannah's stomach tightened. "What about?" "Just some questions. Better if I ask him direct." She led the sheriff to the back room, where Preston was just finishing changing Edward's bandages. Something in Preston's expression told Hannah he wasn't surprised to see the lawman. "Sheriff," Preston acknowledged, washing his hands in the basin. "Got a wire from Silver Creek last night," Holloway said without preamble. "Says a man matching your description is wanted for questioning about a bank robbery 2 weeks back." Hannah's breath caught. Preston's face remained unreadable. "Is that so?" he asked calmly. 3 men robbed the Silver Creek Bank. 2 were caught, 1 got away. Description fits you right down to that scar on your neck. Hannah looked between them, confusion and disbelief warring within her. This man who'd saved her father, who'd sat vigil all night, a bank robber? "I was nowhere near Silver Creek 2 weeks ago," Preston said evenly. "Then you won't mind riding over with me to clear things up," Holloway countered. "Marshall there can confirm if you're the man they're looking for." Preston dried his hands slowly on a towel. "And if I refuse?" The sheriff's hand moved to rest on his gun. "Don't make this difficult, Payne. I'm grateful for what you did with Rakes, but law's the law." Hannah stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. Mr. Payne saved my father's life. He's been nothing but honorable." Holloway's expression softened slightly when he looked at her. "Miss Mitchell, I understand your feelings, but I have to investigate. If he's innocent, he'll be back in no time." "I'll go," Preston said quietly, surprising them both. "But I need a moment to speak with Miss Mitchell first, if you don't mind." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "5 minutes. I'll wait out front." He replaced his hat and left the room. As soon as they were alone, Hannah turned to Preston. "You can't possibly be who they're looking for." Preston's blue eyes were troubled as they met hers. "I'm not a bank robber, Hannah, but I do have a past that follows me." He glanced at her father, still sleeping peacefully. "Change his bandages morning and night. Keep the wound clean. If fever returns, willow bark tea can help." "You're speaking as if you won't return," she said, fighting a sense of dread. Preston took a deep breath. "I may not. The marshal in Silver Creek and I have history." "What kind of history?" A shadow passed across his face. "The kind that makes men see what they want to see." "Tell me the truth," Hannah demanded, surprising herself with her boldness. "Who are you, Preston Payne?" For a long moment he was silent, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I rode with the Union during the war. After I worked as a ranch hand, then a shotgun messenger for the stage company. Made some enemies along the way." His eyes met hers directly. "I've killed men, but never outside the law, never for money or gain." "Then why would they think—" "Because my younger brother robbed that bank," Preston said quietly. "We look alike, and he uses my name sometimes when he's in trouble. Been trying to find him for months to stop him before." He shook his head. "Doesn't matter now." Hannah felt her heart twist at the pain in his voice. "Tell the sheriff. Explain about your brother." "And have them hunting him too." Preston shook his head. "He's still my brother. Made bad choices, but he's not beyond saving." "Neither are you," Hannah insisted. "Let me come with you. Tell them what you did here." "No," Preston said firmly. "You need to stay with your father. This is my problem to solve." The door opened, and Sheriff Holloway reappeared. "Time's up, Payne." Preston nodded, then turned back to Hannah one last time. "Thank you for the meal and the company." His voice softened. "Take care of yourself, Hannah Mitchell." And then he was gone, following the sheriff out into the bright morning sunlight, leaving Hannah standing in the doorway with an inexplicable sense of loss. 3 days passed with no word about Preston. Hannah tended to her father, who improved steadily and was soon able to sit up and take broth. When he was strong enough to hear the full story, she told him everything, including Preston's departure with the sheriff. "Sounds like a good man caught in bad circumstances," Edward commented, his voice still weak. "Many such men out here in the territories." "Do you think he's innocent?" Hannah asked. Her father's eyes were kind. "I think he saved my life. That counts for something in my ledger." On the 4th morning, Hannah opened the store for the first time since the shooting. Business was brisk, with many customers coming as much for gossip as for goods. By midday, she was exhausted from repeatedly telling the story of the robbery attempt and politely deflecting questions about that gunslinger who'd killed Billy Rakes. She was just closing up for lunch when the door opened, admitting a dust-covered rider. Her heart leapt before she realized it wasn't Preston, but a young man she recognized as one of the stable hands from the livery. "Miss Mitchell," he said, removing his hat. "Sheriff sent me to fetch you. Says it's important." Hannah's stomach knotted with dread. "My father." "Mrs. Parsons is already headed to sit with him," the young man assured her. "Sheriff said to tell you it's about Payne." Hannah grabbed her shawl without hesitation. Outside, the stable hand had brought a horse for her, and they rode quickly to the sheriff's office at the end of the main street. Sheriff Holloway was waiting on the boardwalk, his expression unreadable. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming." "Is it Preston? Is he all right?" The sheriff gestured her inside. "Better let him tell you himself." Her heart stuttered as she stepped into the office and saw Preston sitting on a bench against the wall. He looked travel-worn and weary, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw, but otherwise unharmed. "Preston," she breathed, relief washing over her. He stood, hat in hands. "Hannah." Sheriff Holloway cleared his throat. "Mr. Payne's been cleared of any involvement in the Silver Creek robbery. Marshal there confirmed he wasn't the man they're looking for." He had the grace to look slightly abashed. Seems there was some confusion about the description. Preston's eyes never left Hannah's face. "The sheriff was kind enough to escort me back to Copper Springs himself," Holloway harumphed. "Least I could do after the inconvenience." He moved toward the door. "I'll give you folks a moment." When they were alone, Hannah took a step closer to Preston. "I was worried when you didn't return." "The marshal had many questions," Preston replied. "Took time to sort everything out." His eyes softened. "How's your father?" "Much better. He's asked about you." Preston nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. That's good." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I should be moving on." "Why?" The question escaped her before she could stop it. "I told you, I'm heading to Montana." Hannah summoned her courage. "You also said you were looking for your brother. What if he comes through here? Wouldn't it make sense to stay a while in case he follows the same routes you do?" Preston studied her face. "That's a thin reason to delay a journey." "Maybe I can offer a better one," Hannah said, her heart pounding. "My father needs help running the store while he recovers. We were planning to hire someone, but—" She took a deep breath. "We'd rather it be someone we trust." Something flickered in Preston's eyes, surprise, and perhaps something warmer. "You'd trust me? After everything?" "Especially after everything," Hannah replied firmly. "Unless you're in a hurry to reach Montana." Preston was quiet for a long moment. "Montana will still be there come spring," he finally said. "And your father does need looking after." Hannah couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "Is that a yes, Mr. Payne?" His answering smile transformed his weary features. "It appears it is, Miss Mitchell." The following week settled into a rhythm Hannah had never expected, but grew to cherish. Preston proved himself invaluable at the store, his strength and knowledge of the territory complementing her organizational skills and business acumen. Under their joint management, the mercantile flourished, drawing customers from outlying ranches and homesteads who appreciated Preston's understanding of their needs and Hannah's fair pricing. Edward recovered slowly but steadily, and by mid-October was able to work short hours at the store, leaving Preston free to help with the heavier tasks Hannah had been struggling with, restocking the high shelves, moving freight deliveries, and repairing the weather-damaged roof before winter set in. What surprised Hannah most was the ease with which Preston integrated himself into their small family. His quiet presence at dinner each evening, his thoughtful questions about her life in Philadelphia, his patient explanations of Western ways, all created a comfort she hadn't expected to find so far from everything familiar. She learned, in bits and pieces, more about his past, how he'd lied about his age to join the Union Army at 16, his years working cattle drives after the war, the brother, 4 years younger, who'd fallen in with a rough crowd after their parents died. Patrick was always the charming one, Preston told her one evening as they sat on the small porch behind the store, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. Could talk his way into or out of anything. Just never learned there are consequences to choices. You feel responsible for him, Hannah observed, wrapping her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. Preston's eyes remained on the horizon. He's all the family I have left. Without thinking, Hannah reached over and placed her hand on his. Not anymore, she said softly. His eyes met hers, surprise giving way to something deeper that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might turn his hand to hold hers, or perhaps say something to acknowledge the current that had been building between them these past weeks. Instead, he gently withdrew his hand and stood. "It's getting cold," he said. "You should head inside." The moment passed, but Hannah felt its echo for days afterward, noting how Preston seemed to maintain a careful distance between them. Always polite, but never quite as unguarded as he'd been that evening on the porch. November brought the first real cold snap of the season, and with it, a surge of customers stocking up for winter. Preston and Hannah worked side by side from dawn till dusk, Edward helping where he could, but still tiring easily. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Hannah was tallying the ledger while Preston swept the store. The comfortable silence between them was broken by the jingling of the bell over the door. "We're closed," Preston called without looking up. "Even for family?" The unfamiliar voice made Hannah raise her head. A young man stood in the doorway, so similar to Preston in build and coloring that there could be no doubt of their relation, though his face lacked the weathered maturity of his brother's. Preston froze, broom in hand. "Patrick?" The younger Payne grinned, though Hannah noted it didn't reach his eyes. "In the flesh, brother." He sauntered into the store, glancing around with apparent interest. "Nice little setup you've got here." Preston set the broom aside, his posture tense. "What are you doing in Copper Springs?" "Looking for you, of course." Patrick removed his gloves, revealing hands too smooth for a working man. "Heard some interesting tales about my big brother playing hero, shooting a man, getting cozy with a pretty shopkeeper." His eyes slid to Hannah, assessing her with a boldness that made her skin crawl. "Miss Mitchell, my brother Patrick," Preston said stiffly. "Hannah and her father own this establishment. I've been helping out while Mr. Mitchell recovers from an injury." Patrick swept his hat off in an exaggerated gesture. "Charmed, Miss Mitchell. Now I see why my brother's been lingering in this dust heap of a town." "Patrick," Preston warned, stepping between them. Hannah stood, closing the ledger. "I should check on my father." She looked at Preston. "Will you be joining us for supper as usual?" Before Preston could answer, Patrick interjected. "We'd be delighted, wouldn't we, Prez? Been ages since I've had a home-cooked meal." Hannah saw the conflict in Preston's eyes. "Both of you are welcome," she said carefully. "Half an hour?" Preston nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll be there." When she had gone, Preston turned to his brother. "Why are you really here, Patrick?" The younger man's facade of cheerfulness dropped away. "I need help, Press. I'm in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Preston asked, though he suspected he already knew. Patrick paced the store, picking up items and setting them down without really looking at them. "The kind that follows a man, the kind with guns." He turned, a pleading expression replacing his earlier cockiness. "I made a mistake. Got in with some men in Cheyenne, planning a job." "A robbery," Preston translated flatly. "A bank," Patrick confirmed. "But I backed out before it happened, I swear. Only they're saying I took my cut anyway, disappeared with it. Now they're hunting me." Preston studied his brother's face, trying to separate truth from fiction. Patrick had always been a convincing liar, even as a child. "And did you? Take the money?" Patrick looked offended. "Of course not. Would I come to you if I had that kind of money?" "You might," Preston said evenly, "if you'd spent it already." A flash of anger crossed Patrick's features before he controlled it. "I'm your brother. I'm asking for help." Preston sighed, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him. "What kind of help?" "Just a place to lie low for a while. Maybe some cash to get further south. Mexico, maybe. Running won't solve your problems. Patrick's expression hardened. Easy for you to say. You've always been the righteous one, haven't you? Never a misstep, never a mistake. I've made plenty, Preston replied quietly. I just faced the consequences instead of running from them. For a moment, the brothers stared at each other across a divide that seemed to grow wider with each passing year. Finally, Preston spoke again. You can stay a few days until we figure something out, but no trouble, Patrick. These are good people who've been kind to me. Patrick's smile returned, though it remained brittle around the edges. No trouble, I promise. Just a quiet visit between brothers. He glanced around the store once more. Though I have to say, domestic life suits you strangely well. The pretty shopkeeper part of that appeal. Preston ignored the jibe. Let's get cleaned up for supper. And Patrick, be respectful in their home. When am I not? Patrick asked, spreading his hands innocently. Supper that evening was a strained affair. Edward Mitchell, now able to join them at the table, was cordial to Patrick, but clearly reserved. Hannah made polite conversation, asking about the brothers' childhood in Ohio, but Preston noted how she seemed to instinctively keep her distance from Patrick, despite his brother's attempts to charm her. After the meal, when Edward had retired and Hannah was clearing the dishes, Patrick leaned back in his chair with a contented sigh. Fine cooking, Miss Mitchell. Reminds me of our mothers, doesn't it, Prez? Preston, who had been helping stack plates, nodded. Hannah's a fine cook. And a fine-looking woman, too, Patrick added with a wink. My brother's a lucky man to have found such a position. Hannah's cheeks colored, but she kept her composure. Mr. Payne has been invaluable to our business. We're fortunate he decided to stay. Ah, but for how long? Patrick mused. Preston's never been one to put down roots. Always restless, always moving on to the next place, the next job. He looked directly at Hannah. Wouldn't want you getting too attached to a man with wanderlust in his blood. That's enough, Patrick, Preston said sharply. Hannah set down the plates she was holding, her expression carefully neutral. I should finish these dishes. Please excuse me. She retreated to the kitchen, leaving the brothers alone. Preston glared at his younger sibling. Was that necessary? Patrick shrugged. Just stating facts, brother. You planning to spend the rest of your days as a shopkeeper in this backwater? Because if so, you're not the man I remember. People change, Preston said simply. Do they? Patrick leaned forward. Or do they just pretend to until they can't maintain the charade anymore? Preston stood, his patience wearing thin. I've arranged a cot for you in the storeroom. We both have an early start tomorrow. Patrick raised an eyebrow. We. If you're staying, you're working, Preston said firmly. Freight delivery comes at dawn. The younger Payne looked as though he might protest, then shrugged again. Whatever you say, big brother. I'm at your service. Later that night, after Patrick had retired to the storeroom, Preston found Hannah sitting alone by the fireplace in the small parlor, a book open in her lap but her gaze fixed on the flames. I apologize for my brother, he said quietly. Hannah looked up, her expression softening when she saw him. No need. Family can be complicated. Preston sat in the chair opposite her. Patrick has a talent for complication, he hesitated. What he said about me always moving on. You don't owe me an explanation, Hannah interrupted gently. Maybe not, but I want to give you one anyway. Preston leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've spent most of my life without roots, that's true. Never saw the point in settling when there was always another horizon calling. And now? Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Preston's eyes met hers, and for once he didn't look away. Now I'm finding reasons to stay in one place. Good reasons. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Hannah closed her book, her fingers trembling slightly. Preston. A crash from the direction of the store interrupted her. They both jumped to their feet. Stay here, Preston ordered, already moving toward the sound, hand reaching for the gun he still wore out of habit. Hannah ignored his command, following close behind him as he moved through the darkened kitchen toward the storeroom. The door stood ajar, moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating scattered crates and goods. "Patrick?" Preston called softly. No answer came. Preston pushed the door wider, revealing an empty cot and open window. On the floor lay a broken lantern, its glass shattered across the wooden boards. "He's gone," Hannah said unnecessarily. Preston cursed under his breath, moving to the window. Outside, in the moonlight, he could just make out a figure moving toward the stable behind the mercantile. "Stay inside and lock the doors," he told Hannah. "Don't open them until I return." "What are you going to do?" she asked, worry creasing her brow. "Find my brother before he causes any more trouble," Preston replied grimly, already heading for the back door. The night air bit cold as Preston moved silently across the yard toward the stable. A soft nickering from within told him his suspicions were correct. Patrick was likely attempting to take one of the horses, probably planning to disappear again, running from whatever trouble pursued him. The stable door was ajar, a faint light visible within. Preston drew his gun and approached cautiously. Inside, he found Patrick saddling Hannah's mare, a small pack already secured to the saddle. "Going somewhere?" Preston asked quietly. Patrick spun, his own gun appearing in his hand with surprising speed. When he saw Preston, he didn't lower it. "Had to make sure you weren't someone else," Patrick said, though he still kept the weapon trained on his brother. "Put it away, Pat," Preston said, his own gun held loose but ready at his side. "Whatever you're running from, this isn't the way." Patrick's laugh was bitter. "What would you suggest? Turning myself in, facing a noose for something I didn't even do?" "If you're innocent, prove it," Preston urged. "I'll help you." "Like you helped me after Mother and Father died?" Patrick's voice turned hard. "Left me with Aunt Martha while you ran off to play soldier?" "I was trying to do right by you," Preston said, the old guilt surfacing. "Send money home, give you a better life than—" "Spare me," Patrick cut him off. "You wanted freedom, same as I do now." He tightened the cinch on the saddle. "Only difference is, I'm honest about it." Preston took a step closer. "Leave the horse. Take mine if you must go, but don't steal from these people." "Your people, you mean?" Patrick sneered. "Found yourself a ready-made family, didn't you? The pretty daughter, the ailing father in need of a strong son. How convenient." Anger flared in Preston's chest. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Patrick's expression turned calculating. "I saw how you look at her, how she looks at you, playing house, pretending you belong somewhere respectable." His smile was sharp. "Wonder what she'd think if she knew some of the things you've done." Preston's jaw clenched. "That's enough, Patrick." "Is it?" Patrick cocked his head. "Does she know about Willow Creek? About the men who died there because of your decisions?" "That was war," Preston said, his voice low. "Different time, different circumstances." "Tell that to their widows." Patrick mounted the horse in a smooth motion, gun still trained on Preston. "I'm taking this horse, and whatever's in the cash box, consider it payment for all those years you weren't there." Preston raised his gun. "I can't let you do that." For a long moment, the brothers stared at each other over the barrels of their weapons, a lifetime of love and resentment hanging in the balance. "Would you really shoot me, Prez?" Patrick asked softly. Before Preston could answer, a voice called from the stable entrance. "Preston?" Hannah stood framed in the doorway, a shotgun in her hands. Patrick's gun swung toward her almost instinctively. Preston moved without thinking, lunging forward with a shout of warning. The sound of a gunshot split the night, followed by a cry of pain. Preston felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him backward against the stable wall. Through a haze of pain, he saw Hannah level the shotgun at Patrick, her hand steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Drop it," she commanded, with more authority than Preston would have thought possible from the gentle woman he'd come to know. Patrick hesitated, his gun still raised. "You won't shoot me, Miss Mitchell." "I will if you move that gun 1 inch closer to Preston," Hannah replied, her voice steel. "Now drop it." Something in her tone must have convinced Patrick she meant business. He lowered his weapon slowly, then let it fall to the stable floor. "Get down from that horse," Hannah ordered next. Patrick complied, his earlier bravado replaced by wariness. As soon as his feet touched the ground, Hannah moved to Preston's side, keeping the shotgun trained on Patrick. "How badly are you hurt?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the younger Payne. Preston pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "I'll live," he managed through gritted teeth, "though my pride's wounded worse than my arm." The sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of Sheriff Holloway and 2 deputies, drawn by the gunshot. "What in blazes is going on here?" the sheriff demanded, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. "This man was attempting to steal my horse and money from our store," Hannah explained, finally lowering the shotgun as the lawmen trained their weapons on Patrick. "He shot his brother when he tried to stop him." Holloway looked from Patrick to the wounded Preston. "This true, Payne?" Preston nodded grimly. "More or less." The sheriff motioned to his deputies. "Take him to the jail. We'll sort this out in the morning." As they led Patrick away, he called back over his shoulder, "This isn't over, Prez. You can't run from who you really are forever." When they were gone, Hannah set aside the shotgun and helped Preston to his feet. "Let's get you inside. That needs tending." "I told you to stay in the house," Preston said, wincing as she helped him across the yard. Hannah's expression was a mixture of exasperation and concern. "And I'm very glad I didn't listen, or you might be bleeding a lot worse right now." Inside, she sat him at the kitchen table and cut away his shirt sleeve to examine the wound. "The bullet went through clean," she announced after careful inspection. "You're lucky." "Luckier than I deserve," Preston muttered. Hannah paused in her ministrations, meeting his gaze directly. "What did your brother mean? About running from who you are?" Preston closed his eyes briefly. "It's a long story." "I have time," Hannah replied, beginning to clean the wound with practiced efficiency. So as she worked, Preston told her. About Willow Creek, a small skirmish near the end of the war where his unit had been ambushed. How, as the ranking officer after the captain fell, he had ordered a retreat that saved most of his men, but left 3 wounded soldiers behind. How he'd gone back alone to try to save them, only to find them executed by Confederate raiders. "I've carried those men with me ever since," he finished quietly. "Patrick knows it's the one thing that can still cut me to the quick, the thought that I failed them." Hannah had finished bandaging his shoulder and now sat beside him, her hands resting lightly on his good arm. "You were young, in an impossible situation." "There's always a choice," Preston said. "I've spent years trying to make the right one since then, to balance the scales somehow." "Is that why you helped my father? Why you stayed?" Preston looked at her then, really looked at her, allowing himself for the first time to acknowledge what had been growing in his heart these past months. "At first, perhaps," he admitted. "But I stayed because of you, Hannah, because for the first time since I can remember, I felt like I was where I belonged." Hannah's eyes shimmered in the lamplight. "And now, with Patrick in jail, and your past laid bare?" Preston reached out with his good hand, tentatively touching her cheek. "Now I'm still where I belong, if you'll have me." Her answer was to lean forward and press her lips gently to his, a kiss that spoke of comfort, forgiveness, and something far deeper than either had dared to name until now. Morning brought a somber reckoning. Sheriff Holloway arrived at the Mercantile just after dawn with news that a telegram had confirmed Patrick Payne was indeed wanted for the Cheyenne bank robbery, not just as an accomplice who'd backed out, as he'd claimed, but as the ringleader who'd shot a guard during the heist. "Marshal from Wyoming Territory will be here in 3 days to take him back for trial," Holloway informed them. "Your brother's asking to see you, Payne." Preston, his arm in a sling and his expression grave, nodded. "I'll come." Hannah insisted on accompanying him to the jail, despite his protests that this was something he should face alone. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself anymore," she reminded him firmly. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The cell where Patrick was being held was small but clean. He sat on the narrow cot, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had the night before. "Come to say goodbye, big brother?" he asked when Preston approached the bars. His eyes shifted to Hannah. "And you brought your lady friend. How touching." Preston ignored the sarcasm. "Why did you do it, Pat? The bank, the guard, that's not who you are." Patrick's bitter laugh held no humor. "How would you know who I am? You've spent more time with her in the last few months than you've spent with me in the last 5 years. That's not fair." "Life isn't fair," Patrick cut him off. "You taught me that lesson well enough." He stood, approaching the bars. "Remember when I was 10 and I found that wounded hawk? Wanted to nurse it back to health, but you said it would never fly again, that keeping it alive would just prolong its suffering." Preston remembered. "I was trying to spare you disappointment." "You were right, though," Patrick continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Some things are too damaged to save." His eyes, so like Preston's own, looked hollow. "Maybe I'm one of them." "No." Preston's denial was immediate and fierce. "You're my brother. Whatever you've done, whatever happens next, that doesn't change." Patrick studied him for a long moment. "You really believe that, don't you? That blood counts for something in the end." "I do," Preston confirmed, "and I'll be there, Pat. When they take you back to Cheyenne, when the trial comes, I'll be there." Something flickered in Patrick's expression. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe just surprise. "And what about your new life here?" he asked, glancing at Hannah. "Your shop and your girl?" Preston didn't look away from his brother. "Some things are worth waiting for." Hannah stepped forward then, her hand finding Preston's good one and squeezing gently. "Mr. Payne," she addressed Patrick directly, "I don't know you well, but I know your brother. He believes in you, and that counts for something with me." Her voice softened. "Whatever happens, he won't face it alone. Neither will you." Patrick seemed taken aback by her words. He recovered quickly, masking vulnerability with a sardonic smile. "You found yourself a rare one. Press." His tone held genuine admiration beneath the sarcasm. "Don't mess it up like you usually do." They left the jail shortly after, walking slowly back toward the mercantile. The morning was clear and cool, the street beginning to fill with the day's business. Preston stopped at the corner, looking out toward the distant mountains. "I meant what I said," he told Hannah. "I need to go to Cheyenne for the trial. I can't abandon him again, whatever he's done." Hannah nodded. "I understand." "It could be months before I can return," Preston warned. "The courts move slowly, especially in the territories." "I'll be here," Hannah said simply. "My father and I have waited this long for the right partner in our business. We can wait a little longer." Preston turned to her, searching her face. "Just the business?" Hannah's smile was gentle but sure. "You know better than that, Preston Payne." He did know, and the certainty of it filled him with a warmth that drove back the morning chill. "When I return," he said, "I'd like to speak to your father about something more permanent than a business arrangement." Hannah's eyes widened slightly. "Are you certain?" "After everything with Patrick, with your past, more certain than I've ever been about anything," Preston interrupted softly. "These past months showed me something I never expected to find, Hannah. A home. Not just a place to hang my hat, but somewhere I truly belong." "And Montana?" she asked, recalling his original destination. Preston smiled. "Montana will keep. I've found something better than new horizons." "What's that?" "A reason to stop looking for them." He leaned down, mindful of his injured shoulder, and kissed her gently. Against her lips he whispered words he'd never said to another soul, words that had risen unbidden in his throat the night he'd thought Patrick might harm her. "As long as you're breathing, so am I." 3 days later, Preston rode out with the Wyoming marshal and his prisoner. Hannah stood on the boardwalk outside the mercantile, watching until the small party disappeared over the rise at the edge of town. Edward stood beside her, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. "He'll come back," her father said with quiet certainty. Hannah nodded, brushing away a stray tear. I know. The winter that followed was the hardest Hannah had ever known. Not because of the bitter cold or the occasional shortages that affected the remote town, but because of Preston's absence. His letters arrived irregularly, carried by whatever travelers happened to be making the journey from Cheyenne to Copper Springs. Through his correspondence, she followed the slow progress of Patrick's case. The younger Payne had finally admitted his guilt, but claimed the shooting of the guard had been accidental. The trial was delayed twice, once by heavy snow that prevented witnesses from arriving, once by the illness of the presiding judge. By spring, when the snows melted and the first wildflowers appeared on the hills surrounding Copper Springs, Hannah had almost given up hope of Preston's imminent return. His last letter had mentioned further complications, Patrick's sentencing delayed yet again by legal maneuvering. You should join him in Cheyenne, Edward suggested one evening as they closed the store. The business is doing well enough that I can manage for a few weeks. Hannah shook her head. Preston would never forgive himself if I traveled all that way only to have the matter resolved the day after I arrived. She smiled ruefully. Besides, one of us should be here when he finally returns. If he returns, Edward said gently. Hannah met her father's concerned gaze. He will. As spring turned to early summer, Copper Springs experienced a small boom. A new silver vein had been discovered in the hills to the north, bringing an influx of miners and the businesses that catered to them. The mercantile flourished, keeping Hannah and Edward busier than they'd ever been. It was on such a busy day in late June, with the store full of customers and Hannah rushing to fill orders, that the bell over the door jingled once more. She didn't look up immediately, hands full of fabric she was measuring for Mrs. Turner's new curtains. Be with you in a moment, she called, carefully marking the measurement. I've waited this long, a familiar voice replied. I can wait a moment more. Hannah's head snapped up, the fabric forgotten. Preston stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking travel-worn but whole. His eyes, those clear blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for months, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. The store fell silent as every customer turned to watch the reunion. Hannah barely noticed them, her focus entirely on the man before her. She stepped around the counter, moving toward him as if in a dream. You're back, she said, stopping just short of touching him, suddenly aware of their audience. Preston nodded. Told you I would be. From the back of the store, Edward emerged, a broad smile spreading across his face when he spotted Preston. About time you showed up, son. We've been running ourselves ragged without you. The tension broke, and suddenly the store was alive with chatter again, customers offering greetings and welcome to the returned cowboy. Preston accepted them with good grace, but his eyes kept returning to Hannah, who stood watching him with a mixture of joy and disbelief. It was late afternoon before the store emptied enough for them to talk properly. Edward, sensing their need for privacy, offered to finish closing up while they took a walk. Outside, the summer evening was perfect golden sunlight bathing the street, the air warm but not yet hot, scented with sage and pine from the surrounding hills. They walked in companionable silence for a while, heading toward the small creek that gave Copper Springs its name. How is Patrick? Hannah finally asked as they reached the bank and stopped beneath a cottonwood tree. Preston's expression grew somber. Serving 10 years in the territorial prison. Could have been worse. They were pushing for hanging until witnesses confirmed the shooting was likely accidental. He sighed. He's young enough that he'll have a life to rebuild when he gets out. And you'll be there to help him, Hannah said, not a question, but a statement of faith. Preston nodded. I will. He turned to face her fully. But I'll be here too, if that offer still stands. Which offer? Hannah asked, though her racing heart knew the answer. The one about a permanent position, Preston replied, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. Unless things have changed while I was away. Hannah shook her head, unable to stop the smile that bloomed across her face. Nothing's changed, Preston. Not a thing that matters. Relief washed over his features. Good, because I've had a lot of time to think. sitting in that courtroom day after day. He took her hands in his. I realized something important, Hannah. All those years I spent moving from place to place, I wasn't searching for new horizons, I was running from the past, from myself. And now? Hannah asked softly. Now I'm done running, Preston said firmly. I want to build something lasting, a business, a home. He hesitated, then added in a voice rough with emotion, a family. Hannah felt tears welling in her eyes. I'd like that too. Preston reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, simple gold band. I stopped in Denver on my way back, wanted to do this properly. His eyes, so clear and honest, met hers. Hannah Mitchell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, she whispered, not trusting her voice for more. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Preston pulled her close with his other arm. I meant what I said before I left, he murmured against her hair. As long as you're breathing, so am I. That's a promise I intend to keep for all our days. Hannah smiled through her tears. Then we'll breathe together for a very long time. Their wedding took place in early autumn, when the aspens in the hills had turned to gold and the air carried the first hint of the winter to come. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the small church overflowing with well-wishers. Edward Mitchell, now fully recovered from his injury, proudly walked his daughter down the aisle to where Preston waited, looking more handsome than Hannah had ever seen him in a new suit, ordered specially from Denver. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to stand by each other through whatever joys and sorrows life might bring. When Preston slipped the gold band onto Hannah's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his eyes clear with certainty. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher declared, beaming at the couple. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Payne. Preston did so with a tenderness that brought tears to more eyes than just Hannah's. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Hannah felt a sense of completion she had never known before, as if the final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. The celebration afterward at the town hall was joyous, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. Preston surprised everyone, including his new wife, by proving to be an excellent dancer, guiding Hannah across the floor with confident grace. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, breathless from a particularly spirited reel. Preston grinned. "Army balls. Officers were expected to be gentlemen, even in wartime." His expression softened as he looked down at her. "Besides, I wanted to make sure our first dance as husband and wife was memorable." "Everything about today has been memorable," Hannah assured him, squeezing his hand. Later, as the festivities wound down, Edward approached the couple with a leather portfolio in his hands. "Wedding present," he explained, handing it to Preston. "Been working on this for a while." Preston opened it, Hannah peering over his arm. Inside were legal documents formally changing the name of the business to Mitchell and Payne Mercantile and listing Preston as co-owner with equal share to Hannah's. "Sir, I don't know what to say," Preston began, genuinely moved by the gesture. Edward waved away his thanks. "You saved my life, son. More importantly, you've made my daughter happier than I've ever seen her. This is just making official what we all already know, your family now." The days and weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of contentment. Preston and Hannah moved into the small house next to the mercantile that Edward had purchased as a wedding gift, insisting he preferred the rooms above the store for himself. The business continued to thrive under their joint management, with Preston's practical knowledge of ranching and mining needs complementing Hannah's keen eye for merchandise and accounting. As winter descended on Copper Springs, bringing snow that transformed the rugged landscape into a gleaming wonderland, the Paynes made their home a haven of warmth and love. In the evenings they would sit before their fireplace, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence between two people who no longer needed words to communicate their deepest feelings. It was during one such evening, with snow falling gently outside their window and a fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth, that Hannah shared news that would change their lives once more. "Preston," she said, setting aside her embroidery, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading, immediately alert to the special quality in her voice. "What is it?" Hannah took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, still flat but soon to change. "Come spring, there will be 3 of us." For a moment, Preston simply stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly across his features. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled both of them, he swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small parlor. "Careful," Hannah laughed. "I'm in a delicate condition, remember?" Preston set her down gently, his expression transforming into one of comical concern. "I'm sorry, did I hurt you? Is everything—" Hannah silenced him with a kiss. "Everything is perfect." As he held her close, Preston thought about the long, winding path that had led him to this moment, the war, the years of wandering, the guilt and grief he'd carried, the brother he'd failed to save. All of it had somehow brought him here, to this woman, this home, this future, bright with promise. "I love you, Hannah Payne," he whispered against her hair. "You and our child, more than I ever thought possible." Hannah leaned back to look up at him, her eyes shining with happiness. "We love you too." Her smile turned teasing. "Though I think your son might be a bit young to express the sentiment." "Son?" Preston repeated, his heart swelling at the thought. "You're certain it's a boy?" Hannah laughed. "Not at all. But something tells me our firstborn will have his father's blue eyes and stubborn chin." "God help us if he does," Preston chuckled, "though I wouldn't mind a daughter with her mother's spirit and grace." "Either way," Hannah said softly, "this child will know what it means to be loved, to have a father who keeps his promises and a mother who believes in second chances." Preston cupped her face in his hands. "As long as you're breathing, so am I," he reminded her, the vow as solemn now as the first time he'd spoken it. "You and our child, you're my whole world now." In the years that followed, that world expanded to include not one child, but 3 sons and a daughter who grew strong and true under their parents' loving guidance. Preston and Hannah faced the challenges of the Wild West together, weathering droughts and blizzards, economic hardships and personal losses, always finding strength in each other. Patrick Payne eventually served his sentence and, with his brother's help, built a new life for himself in Colorado, becoming a changed man who visited his niece and nephews regularly, bearing gifts and stories, but no longer shadows from the past. And on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work done, Preston and Hannah would often sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains with the same golden light that had blessed their first days together. In those moments, with her head resting on his shoulder and his arm wrapped securely around her, they needed no words to express the simple truth they'd discovered together, that home wasn't a place on any map, but the space 2 hearts created when they beat as one. For in a land as vast and untamed as the American West, they had found something rarer than any gold rush or silver strike, a love strong enough to weather any storm, true enough to last a lifetime, and deep enough to leave a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As Preston often told their children in the bedtime stories, they clamored for night after night. The greatest adventure isn't crossing mountains or fighting outlaws. It's finding the courage to open your heart to someone else, to promise them forever and mean it with every breath you take. It was a lesson Hannah and Preston lived every day of their lives together, through sunshine and shadow, joy and sorrow, always remembering the promise that had begun their journey. As long as you're breathing, so am I.